Hello and welcome to Punk Rock Academic, the podcast where the rebellious spirit of punk rock meets the halls of higher education. We dive into the stories of those who break the mold, challenge the status quo, and bring the DIY ethos to academia. I'm Alex Yore, and with me as always is Dallas McCullough, your guide through the intersection of anarchy and academics. Get ready to meet the professors, scholars, and students who are as hardcore about their studies as they are about their music. Let's turn up the volume and tear down the walls of convention. This is Punk Rock Academic. Here we go, Punk Rock Academic, Episode 8. Today we're chatting with John Peck, M.A. John is a writer, editor, content manager, and co-owner of Volta Press, a letterpress print studio and underground publisher that he founded with his wife. He has published fiction, essays, and humor in a wide variety of journals and anthologies, and has even spent over a decade lending his talents to the video game industry. A native of Berkeley, California, John received his bachelor's and master's degrees in English from Stanford University. His thesis on James Joyce's Ulysses focused on language as a modernist refiguring of the Christian concept of incarnation, with acclaimed Irish poet Eavan Boland as his advisor. You may have also heard John as the bassist for the band American Steel since the mid-90s. They released 2 albums with Lookout Records and then went on hiatus in 2002. During that time, John formed the indie post-punk band Communiqué, also on Lookout. American Steel reformed in 2007, putting out 2 more full-lengths on Fat Records, and have recently begun performing again after another hiatus during the pandemic. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Hey, what's cracking? We're hanging out here with John Peck from American Steel.
Hey, guys.
And then I'm a little bit jealous. We got kind of a weird time situation because I've been dealing with the American healthcare system all fucking day, and you are in Germany where you do not deal with the American healthcare system all fucking day.
That's right. Yeah, I deal with the German healthcare system, which is, of course, better, but yeah, not as rosy as some people might have people.
It's senselessly bureaucratic, but not in a for-profit sort of way.
But it still works. Yeah.
Yeah. Sick. So you played bass in American Steel. You've been in that band since, the 90s? And then I had never met you until I've known your drummer, Scott, for some time. I tried to get you guys to come to Hawaii when Alex and I were living out there, and I think COVID fucked everything up. But then he told me when he knew about this podcast, said, oh yeah, John got multiple degrees from fucking Stanford, like while you were putting stuff out on Lookout and touring constantly. So that seemed like absolutely perfect for the sort of shit we do, and just want to kind of dive in deeper. So yeah. What are your actual degrees?
So I have a bachelor's and master's from Stanford. They're both in English, English literature generally. They each have a focus, but I kept it pretty general, and they're actually from within a year of each other. So I did what's called a coterminal degree there, meaning you're kind of finishing the tail end of your bachelor's as you've already started on your master's. And I was always on just kind of an accelerated get the credits out of the way thing. I knew I wanted to major in English from the very beginning. So I was already knocking out requirements early on, electives, etc., and focusing. I think one semester I did 20 credits, all just sort of different, each one a different English requirement. But in kind of just a numbers way. So get that out of the way so that then I could take the sort of smaller classes that I found much more interesting. So I was already gravitating towards the master's classes, not because I was some major, whiz kid at them or something. I was generally in those, to be honest, pretty out of my league, because there would be, 7th year PhD candidates and these just dropping incredible knowledge about stuff. And I was essentially the age of a sophomore or junior, just kind of nodding along. But those small class sizes, to the point where some were maybe 5-6 people, were really incredible. And that's what I was always gravitating towards. So long story short, I applied for within the department. You were able to do, it's still kind of an official application, but you apply within the department to say, I'm already here getting my bachelor's. I want to now get my master's, and was accepted. And so kind of kept doing what I was doing, like taking these kind of 200 level English classes, and was able to do the whole thing in about 4.5 years. Again, not because of any kind of Doogie Howser accelerated brilliance, but really because I was so focused from the beginning on knocking out the requirements that trip a lot of people up, that I could really just focus on taking pretty much all English classes at the end. And there was inevitably each quarter, it wasn't semesters, there was quarters, one that would completely kick my ass, but it meant that if it was all English classes, I could sort of focus on that and really give the time needed to the ones that were dragging me around a bit.
Was that sort of your plan from the get-go? Like when you first entered, in your bachelor's, was that the plan, or did that sort of develop over time?
The master's degree was not. So getting a degree, knowing I wanted it to be in English, that was sort of known, and just kind of wanted to jump in and get started. But yeah, as it was really more like second and third year, I would find myself occasionally out of luck or whatever in some of these very small classes. And just that environment and that atmosphere was like, oh, this is what I want to be doing. Because the lecture hall thing is fine. It's great. Went to a pretty big high school, Berkeley High, which I think is maybe 2,500 people. So medium to large high school. But, I was used to large classes and kind of anonymity and stuff. But that kind of seminar format is where my brain really kind of lit up. And again, I was totally out of my league in most of these, but was able to hold my own well enough. But just that kind of atmosphere and realizing that could be sort of the experience if I went into a master's really made me interested in it. And it was just a great department. A lot of good professors that I ended up seeing again on my second time around through some of their classes. So yeah, not planning in any way to get like a master's degree, but ended up, because I was there and because I was already kind of enjoying it, deciding to do that as well.
And at that point, were you sort of just glad to be done with it, or did you ever consider doing a PhD or going farther with the education?
Yeah, I mean, I have not really considered, I've considered doing a PhD for sure. It was not something I was going to do at that time. So at that point, I was kind of glad to be done with it. I really so I'm from Berkeley, which is just up the road, basically. Of course, those two schools are bitter rivals if I cared one bit about football, which I don't. No offense to anyone who does, but like everyone asks, oh, was it crazy to go to Stanford growing up in Berkeley? It's no, I don't care. But I couldn't have gone to Berkeley because it was like I walked through the campus to get to Berkeley High. Like it was so close to home that it would have literally been like, walking out of a party and running into my folks or something. Like it was so close there.
Your version of a community college was UC Berkeley that happens to be like the number one rated.
Bizarre, but it really was. We'd hang
Yeah.
out on the campus and sneak around and run away from the campus police. And like, it was really right there. I grew up there because my parents had history there. So my mom had gotten her JD ultimately from Bolt at Berkeley and had just stayed in Berkeley ever since, since the 60s. But basically, it was just too close. And Stanford worked out being, to be honest, being cheaper than Berkeley too, with kind of a full scholarship there that they'd offered. So really, it was like, it just absolutely made sense. There was no way I was going to stick within 5 blocks of home when I could just go slightly further down the road to this other world-class school.
There is some irony, I think, in your act of rebellion going to Stanford.
Yeah, no, it was always, I was a super mega nerd in high school, just kind of straight A kid. A different path from some people that have, some of the guests you've had on have also found academia kind of later in life and have done their road has been very different. Mine was packed so close to the front, so kind of where it should be, right? Or where traditionally it should be, that I kind of finished too quickly, right? So I finished before my brain had fully developed. And I think now I probably would have gotten a lot more out of that program. So this is a whole other conversation. And you can never quite know. There's advantages and disadvantages to each way, I think. But I always had this almost mercenary, like knock out the credits, get them out of the way. And yeah, get to the smaller classes, get to the real stuff. But at the same time, also just kind of knock out the degrees too, which I don't know that I regret it because my life has proceeded in the way it has a lot. A lot of that was because I was able to kind of get through it quickly. And just from a kind of financial perspective, that helps as well to finish as quickly as possible. But basically, it wasn't so much that I disliked it and hated it and wanted to get out of there. It was more just that I was like, okay, I want to kind of get back to life now, or get on with life now, see what that is.
Unlike the people who were adults and wanted to get away from life for a while and went back to school.
Yeah. And that, I think I would get a lot more from it if I went back now and did all the same classes. I would get a lot more from it. I would be a better student. I would be better at, listening, not thinking I knew everything. It's good to have some of the kind of humbleness that comes with getting older, I think, when you're learning, because you never know. It's not like you don't know and then you take the class and right? It's sort of like it's like training, right? It's like learning how to learn, or learning how to study, or learning how to sort of be in a field, as we all, I think, know.
So so Alex lived in San Francisco for 5 years. He actually did his undergrad out there. And I know you're from the Bay Area, but I don't know shit about the Bay Area. I mean, I've been there a few times, but I do know Gilman being in Berkeley. So I just wanted you to kind of talk about your introduction to listening to music. So let's start with that. Just listening to music in general.
Yeah. So, I was lucky in that my folks had great taste, had a good record collection, not a huge record collection, but a solid one from the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Were they hippies?
Yeah. Sort of proto hippies, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Not, our house was not, reeking of patchouli and all that, but definitely we're drawn to California. None of my parents were divorced when I was 2, but step parents as well. None of them were from California. They're all from very far afield, but all kind of drawn to the Bay Area. Like I said, somewhat because of UC Berkeley, but also just because of sort of the culture, the life there. But yeah, good music taste. Grew up listening to everything from, Joni Mitchell to Johnny Cash to the Eurythmics was officially my first concert when I was maybe 7 years old at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, which was awesome.
Hell yeah.
Still love that band. And, good music all around. But in high school, it kind of did that thing that I guess happens if you don't have any kind of sort of awakening, where it just sort of stagnated. So it's like, yes, I continued to like all this great old stuff, but new stuff was not really something I sought out. And it took friends kind of just literally handing me tapes of stuff. So at first it was my good friend Sean gave me a tape that was one side Sonic Youth Goo, other side was, I think, Jane's Addiction, Ritual. And, that wasn't some great awakening. There was sort of alternative stuff everywhere, but that Sonic Youth record in particular got me more into kind of other types of playing. And I'd been playing bass and guitar for a long time, since I was maybe junior high or so. Never too seriously. I'm always kind of in bands here and there and with friends, but mostly. So that album kind of opened my eyes. And then the thing that really did it was meeting Ryan, who's Ryan from my band, from American Steel, in high school. We didn't go to the same high school, but he went to a high school in Berkeley. I met Ryan, who thought I was a total dork, which he was right. I was. And it was like, oh, whatever, I'll if you want to go out to Gilman next week, I'm going to see a show there. And so, we hung out a bit. He was kind of a friend to friend, became a friend, and we went to Gilman together. And the show that night was Jawbreaker, Tourette's, and Indian Summer. And you can imagine,
like $3.
Yeah, it's $5. So it was total new high prices, total controversially raised prices. This would have been 1994. I can say that.
Okay, so that was pre Dear You then, for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely pre Dear You. It was before 24 Hour.
24 Hour. So it would have been on Unfun was 90, so it was between Unfun and 24 Hour.
Well, yeah. Probably. No, they were both 90s. So yeah, anyway.
Okay,
sorry. People can look at people can check our exact dates, but I'm sure it was before 24 Hour, because I remember 24 Hour coming out and saying, "Oh, cool, the new Jawbreaker," and buying it at Rasputin's in Berkeley. But they were playing those songs because the very first song. So I think Indian Summer played, and I said, "Oh, that was great. Was that Jawbreaker?" And he said, "No, you'll know, like Jawbreaker." And they came out and said, "Hey, what's up?" and kicked into Boat Dreams from the Hill, and that was just like, I I've seen places go crazy, but it was never quite like that. That was absolutely insane. And I was like, okay, this is kind of what I want to do forever, always, for the rest of my life. And it was just this, incredible experience. You can imagine. I mean, like we've all had that experience, whatever the band was, but like that was a pretty unfairly good one. And then my second Gilman show a couple months later Ryan was also Jawbreaker. They'd play there like every few months. I think the third one after that was Avail, and it was just sealed at that point. It was like, good Lord, these are pretty stacked first three shows.
Yeah, no doubt.
But like just that Avail show, Avail during that era was absolutely untouchable for just the explosiveness of their show. Got into punk as kind of all I ever wanted to do, listen to, the scene I wanted to be in. Gilman was amazing. After that, I started going to Gilman more, though at that point in the fall, I had already started school. So that'll age me right there, or date me. But yeah, so 94, I was at Stanford, but I would be up in Berkeley all the time and at Gilman I wouldn't say most weekends, but I would say at least once every 1 to 2 months I was at Gilman for a show.
So then you were like a freshman starting at Stanford at that point while starting to get to the Gilman shows?
Yeah. And, so there's different, scenes. Everyone's a bit different. Gilman it's sort of like at that point was kind of what I would call like an anti-fashion scene. There's lots of incredible bands, incredible community, etc. But like the way that lots of us dressed back then was just like the absolute worst shit you could put together, So my hair was like self-dyed as a matter of pride. Like I didn't want anyone's help. So it looked just awful. I had a pair of cutoff sweatpants, which those two words should never go together, but cutoff sweatpants where there had been a big hole in the front that I covered with a giant Avail patch that I sewed on myself. I think I was wearing Tivas everywhere, if you remember those.
Yeah.
And like
the Tiva tan.
Any I was kind of skinny guy back then, but I would wear like triple XL shirts, like the kind of skater style. So this massive, rancid shirt or something over all this. And I must have just looked like absolute garbage. And I would go to class like this and like, meet professors like this and stuff. And like it made an impression, I'm sure. And there's like, it's college, whatever. There's all these weirdos, but like it was definitely different from the Stanford norm that was very prep school, East Coast, really like an imported kind of East Coast prep school culture on the West Coast.
And then at what point did you and Ryan play in other bands before that? Or was American Steel your first like real band?
Not so, yeah. So my first real band was sort of my high school band that had like 7 different names with my friend Sean, who I mentioned before, and a drummer who was quite good. But we were really just a 3-piece, but we would have guests. So we'd play at Laval's Pizzeria in Berkeley. Laval's Subterranean was the venue. I think it's still a venue. Fantastic place, fantastic venue, but it was underground, literally you'd go down the stairs to this place. Capacity in retrospect was probably legally about 30, but they would pack 100 people in there. And so this was like my high school band experience, was playing lots of originals, some covers that we dug, and having guest singers, because neither of us could really or like to sing that much. And so Ryan would occasionally come do a song with us. Other singers would do a song for us. There's a bizarre trivia fact that one of those guys ended up being a film director. He was a singer that we knew in high school, didn't go to our school, but he was like, oh, this guy sings, you should get him to do some songs with you. So we did a show with a singer who became, his name is Colin, and he's the director of, I think, Jurassic World and like several of those Jurassic movies, like huge feature films now, was the singer of our high school band for about a month. But yeah, this was like high school band. So it was like, if I hear recordings now, they're not too bad. They're just kind of weird. Like all of our originals were just kind of stuff we jammed on. So it was all a bit aimless. But none of it was too terrible or cringy. And at that point, I was really listening to stuff like I mentioned Sonic Youth, but also stuff like Primus that was really like heavy bass pride stuff. And I saw Primus probably 6 or 7 times during that era, and they were great too. And like after a few years after that, I kind of went away from them and I was like, that's weird, goofy, cringy stuff. And now I love them again. Like when I hear them, I think they're great. So stuff comes and goes into and out of your taste, I guess. But to answer your question, it was not my first band, but it was the first band where we wrote songs and performed to them. It was like, here is this song. It has this title. It's called this. It's not called, New Jam Number 3 or Sounds Like Fugazi or whatever. So American Steel formed very roughly in 1995. And for the true, maybe 2 or 3 people still out there, probably none of whom are listening to this who remember us, our format was different. So our positions in the band were different. I was our drummer. I'm not a drummer. This was like East Bay again, like just do it, right? Just like doesn't matter if you're scrappy or whatever. And I said, okay, I'll play drums. Cool. And so we had a drum set in this place we practiced. I think I was playing bass and Rory was playing guitar, and I owned the guitar. So like if I forgot to bring the guitar, we wouldn't have a guitar. So it was just this pure like chaos of like, we like music, let's play music. But we got an actual drummer, and I think the first one would have been Jamie for a few times, but then put out an ad to get a drummer in the classifieds in BAM, Bay Area Music, in the BAM classified ads in print, as one did at the time. And Scott ended up answering it. So we played with him a few times and went well together, and he joined the band. And at that point, it was like, okay, we have a real drummer that can actually play. I moved to bass. Ryan and Rory both played guitar, and that was where American Steel really kind of began. So that would have been 1996.
Yeah. So it's been the same 4 dudes for the last 28 years playing the same instruments that they actually own and know how to play.
Yeah, for one album and for a short era, we had a different drummer. It was Jamie, who we knew from high school, who was maybe the very first American Steel drummer. Apart from that, it's really been the 4 of us the whole time.
So by the time your self-titled album came out in 98?
Yeah, I think so. 97, maybe? Yeah, I think 98 is right. Yeah.
Was that originally a self? I know Fat put that out, but that was after the fact sort of thing?
That was not Fat. So that was New Disorder Records. The self-titled was, I think it was 98 and was on New Disorder. And there's kind of a continuity between each thing, because that was on New Disorder, but it was the first of 2 records we did with Kevin Army. So that experience of recording with Kevin Army at Roof Brothers in Oakland was truly one of those like, holy crap. It was a little like being at that first Jawbreaker show where, we just showed up in our scrappy clothes with a scrappy amp, scrappy instruments, and hearing the playback and what Kevin could do to sort of make everything, because he was used to working that way. He was used to working with people that, had sort of crummy gear and, hadn't, bought new strings or bought new heads for their drums or anything. And like, not pro in that sense, but he was used to making it sound great, and hearing the playback of that, and then hearing Rory really be able to sort of unleash his full kind of voice on that record and the playback of that, and hearing how much Ryan could just hit his parts and hit his harmonies too, which is no small feat. He's classically trained in that sense. So he actually was in the San Francisco Boys Course when he was a kid. But just hearing that sort of playback and what, the way it sounded back through the monitors with Kevin was incredible. So that album was 98, we think. We'll let someone on the internet look that up.
That was the same guy who did Rogues March?
Maybe I did Rogues March. So the next year we did Rogues March. In between those, we did the Every New Morning 7-inch, and then Every New Morning, that actual recording ended up being on Rogues March. So the 7-inch was on Cheetah's Records, which is another buddy of ours. And then Rogues March was 99, therefore making this the 25th anniversary, as you saw at Fest recently, which is, we can't really believe.
Were you still in college when American Steel started kind of gigging out?
Yeah, as far as tours, so we did go on tour in, again, the exact years don't matter so much. It's ancient history, but I think 97 would have been maybe our first national tour. Of course, booked by me on a dial-up, not rotary phone, but a landline through Book Your Own Fucking Life. We got a calling card eventually because the first phone bill was brutal. But basically calling up people in Book Your Own Fucking Life, saying we were not lying about our genre entirely, but like we played on that first tour, we played Lansing, Michigan, for example. And the guy was, it's like, oh, it's too bad, too bad you guys aren't a ska band because like we have a ska fest that day. And we said, yeah, we are. So, and wasn't totally a lie. Yeah, we kind of are and were. And yeah, so that, I think our first record wasn't even out at that point. We just had the 7-inch. So we'd written a few and we were like, we could throw in some upbeats on these other ones, but it was like, and we played with metal bands, we played with goofy pop punk bands, we played with indie bands, we played basements, we played crusty cop watch benefits, we played everywhere, anywhere, whatever, really avoiding major urban centers just because we called these people at their homes, and where they lived was usually not in the middle of downtown LA, right? They'd live like sort of outside in suburbs, or they would live in Albuquerque or not even in Albuquerque or outside it. And they would do shows at some vets hall near there or some park or something. And this was Book Your Own Fucking Life. You would call up and they would say, yeah, let's do a show. And it was some of the best shows we ever played, but it was really not in, a lot of them weren't even cities you've heard of, in rural areas, a lot of them, especially being a band from the West. There's always that brutal first few days where every drive is like 9 or 10 hours. And of course, there's some advantages to being in the West, but even just getting to the next city is brutal. So we'd always start our tours exhausted, driving at night because it was so hot, thrashed. One of us would inevitably get sick after 2 or 3 days. But yeah, really touring would be summers, right? Because I was in school, and also it was like just kind of when we did it anyways. That would have been maybe 97 for our first absolutely scrappy tour, where we kind of went out, tagged to the East Coast, went north, tagged, played ABC No Rio, and then came back and played 3 or 4 or 5 more random shows and then went home. 98 would have been kind of the same. And really, I'm trying to think of our first real tour would have been after we signed to Lookout and went out on the Lookout Freakout tour. That would have been, I think, 99 or 2000 with Mr. T Experience and the Eyeliners, which was a great tour because it was just like package tour booked all the way around the country in every major market and played all the venues we knew. We were second of 3 bands. Everyone could come see us who wanted to at a normal time. It was a really good tour. But yeah, started, I think, and it doesn't quite matter what the year was, but I think it was probably 97. So very much when I was still in school. Yeah.
So then when you're touring with Mr. T Experience as your first package, like how did those people receive your band? Because I think there's that whole like the Ramones chord, like just bubblegum pop punk dudes, and you guys were fucking like the quintessential just gruff, beardy, shouty, like guys that grew up hanging out, going to see Jawbreaker dressed like fucking idiots, which has some overlap, but it's quite distinct from that Ramones sound.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember MTX, like they would, like you East Bay, especially in Bay Area, you'd have those 7 inches and those comps where it would be like, J Church and Neurosis or something, or like MTX and like, something like gutter punk, like Filth or something. So there's a little bit of that old school doesn't really matter thing. But also I will say, if you're going to be the odd man out on a tour, it's much better to be the louder, scarier one than to be the wimpier, janglier one, where we also were that in 2001 when we toured with Murder City Devils and Botch. So that was like, we sounded like, the Fifth Dimension on that tour. We were basically like in our more experimental, more musical, you could say, Jagged Thoughts era. It was that record had just come out. And so, we had songs like Wurlitzer, Oregon and stuff on them. And we're playing with like this terrifying stroke-inducing strobe light. I love Botch, but like their live show was frightening. And, we'd go up before that and people would just kind of stare at us blankly. So I will say, yeah, that Lookout Freakout tour for us to be kind of the scrappy, louder, not scarier, but I don't know, more traditionally punk part of that tour was great. And again, second of 3, it was like, you're not opening out the night, but you're also not sort of closing it out. You can get off stage, have beers, have fun, whatever. So that was a lot of fun.
were your boys in school at that time too, like your bandmates, or was it just you doing the booking? So you said, "Fuck it, we're going to do it based around Stanford's schedule," and you guys just work normal jobs, or?
Yeah, no, they weren't in school at all. Ironically, I mean, we all know this as well too. Like, it had nothing to do with like some of the best and most kind of intellectual conversations I had were in the van on tour. Much more so than with these kind of. Stanford was great, and I met a lot of brilliant people there. But there was also this kind of like prep school pipeline where people didn't give two shits about anything they were studying. They just wanted to drink and then work at their dad's firm or whatever. And so, my old friends from back in the day were incredible thinkers, incredible readers too. Like Ryan would just devour books on tour, and we'd talk through them and but no, not in school at all. So it was really like, let's do this summers. That's when I can do. And that was enough. It does mean we saw the whole country, which was incredible, to really see it on the ground like that, see how big it is, see how massive the West and the Midwest are especially. But we saw it in the summer, which is not necessarily it's best for driving maybe, but it's not necessarily the realest time to see everything. Summer is sort of this period, especially in areas where it gets incredibly dark and cold and stuff, where it's more just kind of like the off time, the vacation time, whatever. In the later years, we started doing more fall and spring tours, and those, I would say, I don't know, they had a different feel to them. Not just the weather, obviously, but the kind of like you're in a city when it's kind of up and running and working, and it's not so much this like fun summer, whatever. And maybe better in a way. Like summer, people don't necessarily want to go to a dingy, dark basement that's filled with smoke and hear people yelling at them for 3 hours, So maybe some of these fall shows, I would say the fall tours started feeling better, which would have been more like when I was done with school. So 2000, 2001, 2002. Yeah.
No. Alex, do you know anything about any of these books? James Joyce's Ulysses or the Christian concept of incarnation? You were forced to go to church.
I was actually hoping we could get into that a little bit. I'm much more science guy, so these are not really my wheelhouse. But like I had to look up like Oulipo and a lot of the things that you had sort of mentioned in your bio. So maybe we can kind of switch gears a little bit and start talking if you can kind of expand on that and then your work after graduation and where you're still sort of playing in bands. What were you doing?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, like I said, I sort of knocked out all those requirements. So I would take not just the English department requirements, but the school requirements where you need one civ class, one history class, one math class, whatever. I think I did stat and just kind of pass, fail, finished it. Just so I could focus on these smaller classes. Some of the ones that really stood out to me, again, of course, was because of the professors. So one professor was Gilbert Sorrentino, who was East Coast through and through. From New York, New Jersey, hated California, hated Stanford, was there for like 35 years and just hated every minute of it. It was brilliant though, and just had this great sort of crankiness, but also just this absolute knowledge of and love for experimental writing, modernist writing, and the Oulipo, which is Ouvrier de littérature potentielle. It's a French, started in France, and it's basically writing that is experimental yet incredibly strict with what the experiment is, you could say. So they use things like generative devices. They'll say, this is the classic Oulipo example is the Georges Perec book, Avoid, which is an entire novel without the letter E. So, that's, I don't remember the exact sort of precise names for these limitations. There's also texts where, the first letter of each sentence has to spell something or is taken from another text. So a short paragraph blows up so that each letter of the sentence is dictated. There's all sorts of poems written from X perspective, Y perspective. You're not allowed to do certain thing. There's villanelles where it's only the same 6 words and the lines. All sorts of structural experiment that within that lets you sort of go wild, right? So it truly is. The theory is that it's sort of like subjecting someone to sort of extreme conditions or temperatures or something. It really unlocks some creativity there. The other one I took was a Black Mountain Poets class with Albert Jelpy, who was actually an associate of Jack Kerouac. And I mean, he truly lived the life, went way back with the Beats and the Black Mountain Poets. And that was absolutely mind expanding because Charles Olson and all of them, in retrospect, Charles Olson I think was kind of a pillhead and was on a lot of stuff when he wrote, but was so relentlessly, tirelessly intellectual, but chaotically and beautifully kind of took everything from the Beats and really kind of focused it. So it wasn't just so much about the road, the experience, the life, the partying, the travel, etc., but was really focusing it back on myth and on other books. And then Robert Duncan within that became one of my favorite poets ever. Robert Duncan was San Francisco through and through. So he was, I think, originally East Coast, but moved to San Francisco because he was gay, and it was, at the time was one of the better places to live, but really sort of adopted it and became a San Francisco poet and was part of sort of the San Francisco Renaissance. And really classes like that led me into were the gateway drug or whatever for the Joyce class I ended up taking with Rob Polhemus. That was truly incredible, where we just read Ulysses. It was a class where each week we would read one chapter. So actually it's a long book, but actual amount of reading was not that high. It was more about the close reading and kind of digging into it. And that class was incredible to the point where I said, okay, I think I could write, I wrote a final paper in that class where I had stayed up all night and taken caffeine pills and stuff. It was, kind of, I felt like unlocked some part of my brain that was sort of this leveling up experience where I felt like I understood. Again, there's no like, you start the class and you don't know things and you end the class and you know things. It's not a result that never happens. It's more that you learn how to write about stuff or how to think or how you yourself think about stuff over the course of something. And that sort of experience of that class and pushing myself to write this paper unlocked that to the point where it's like, I could actually think in bigger scale. I could write 50, 100 or more pages about this same thing. And it's not this dread that I had because I hated writing when I was a kid. I don't know how I ended up doing it, but I hated writing. I dreaded word counts. I would always make the margins smaller. I'd always make the fonts bigger. I would always feel, get foot draggy around stuff. I didn't get it. I didn't like it. It felt like a chore. And then at some point, something just kind of broke inside me and it was like, this is awesome. This is kind of all I want to do. So yeah, that Ulysses class then led into what my thesis became. That was Joyce and the Incarnation of Language, where I worked with Eavan Boland, who was the national poet of Ireland before that and had come over to lead the poetry department at Stanford, but had massive experience and knowledge of Irish literature, world literature, 19th century that really helped me out with that. And yeah, ever since then, since school, I've called myself a writer. It's sometimes been true. Right now, more than ever, it's very true. So I'm writing a ton right now and have various things going on with that. But basically, for some years, it really kind of was just a title I would give myself only. But every job I've also had since then. So I've been a writer in the freelance sense, writing essays, articles, reviews, etc. But every sort of steady job I've had since then has had something to do with writing as well. Sometimes it's very tangential. Sometimes it's that the organization was a literary organization, like Small Press Distribution, where I worked soon after school in Berkeley, RIP, just closed this year. But I worked in the warehouse there. But to me, that was kind of a writerly job. It's kind of my Kerouac fantasy of working in warehouses. And it was, a job I could get right out of school and was basically being around so many tens of thousands of incredible books every day that it really felt like a literary atmosphere as well.
Now, do you feel like these sorts of experiences also shaped your kind of musical foundation and maybe how you approach writing parts or writing songs, especially those sort of restrictive exercises, things like that? Did that affect your music at all, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I hadn't, but as having heard you ask that, it's like, yeah, it really did. So there is that Gilman or me at Gilman side of things that's really this scrappy, like anything goes, make a lot of noise, have fun, be crazy, wear whatever garbage you want, play whatever instrument you pick up, which I still embrace as the sort of experimental side. And then there's the structure of Oulipo, the structure of being in an institution like Stanford, of having to tick certain boxes. there's the structure of being in a studio and it's costing someone a lot of money. And you have this producer who you think, kind of looked up to for years, who's actually doing your record. And it's like, you don't want to fuck up and you really want to make sure that you hit your parts and stuff. So there's that discipline too. So between that kind of chaos and that discipline, I think is where great stuff happens. And of course, everything's on a spectrum and everything is inherently chaotic and disciplined. But I think musically, yeah, it's that sort of chaos of punk rock and the genesis of of our scene we came from and our band, where it was like, play anything, doesn't matter, record anywhere, play anywhere. We would play in absolutely non-venues to the point where we played, I think, more gazebos than actual stages on our first tour. Yeah. And we played on a walkway in the middle of a park. It didn't matter, wherever we could set up and plug stuff in, we would play. Coupled with, that real okay, well, now people do want to hear you. And this producer is here and you have the studio booked and hey, you're on a stage where everything is mic'd. Maybe you should tune your guitars, right? Maybe we should buy tuners. That was one of we didn't even own tuners at the beginning. And people would be like, if you're going to play at, 120 dB, maybe consider tuning your guitars first. And so it's like, okay, yeah, well, if people take the time to mic up our amps and people are standing there and they've also have paid to come in and see us, it's not just some free thing out by the park, around the gazebo, then yeah, maybe we should have a little bit of discipline about what we do. And so yeah, I think between those two things is where the magic happens, right? So, and I think in literature, it's something that I've had to learn over the decades. So in my own writing, it was always kind of coming from this beat, Black Mountain kind of experimental side. But I think the rigors of things like, again, Black Mountain or this Ulysses paper, because Ulysses is the perfect embodiment of kind of chaos and experiment and anything goes and filth and obscenity and everything, coupled with absolute rigorousness and a relentless pursuit of insanely, esoteric stuff, history, myth, religion, etc. So in music and in writing as well, yeah, I think that's sort of treading that line between the chaos and order has really kind of defined both.
Like you've been out of school for a long time. You're a middle-aged professional man who does printing and publishing, which is obviously related to the English. But how does the 15-year-old shithead kid at Gilman, how do those experiences impact you now as a grown-ass man in your 40s?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it might sound cliched, but a lot of it that I brought with me the whole time is kind of that DIY thing. And of course, it's easy to say that, did it ourselves, whatever. DIY to me is it's not just do your own zines, play your own shows, blah, blah. It's really fix your own van because you'll die if you don't. You're in the middle of the, Colorado and things are sketchy and you need to keep the radiator running or whatever, or, print your own shirts because there's no other place to do it, or because you can, or because you have someone that taught you how to do it. So to me, that sort of DIY thing has always been part of my early days in punk rock, but has sort of stayed with me my whole life. Of course, again, it's easy to pay lip service to it, but for me, that I could say that has kind of transitioned into kind of an independence and kind of what I would call a sort of internal discipline, right? Where it's not so much do it yourself, it's no one will do it for you. And to me, that's truly the lesson that has taken me my whole life to learn, and I'm still learning, but it's kind of in those early days, we were crazy, not in the sense that we would, drink the most or stage dive the most or whatever. We were crazy in the sense that we would do these tours that were insane. We would drive all night. We would wake the next guy up to drive. We would buy 2 liters of Mountain Dew and drink them and throw up when we got to where we were going because we, stayed up all night on this. And it was pretty insane in that way. So we weren't particularly safe always. We weren't doing tours that made sense. We would drive 6 hours to play a show for no money and just kind of crash in a public, in a national park or something, sleep on the picnic tables. And like, so we were crazy in the sense of like crazy for like doing these tours mostly. Records, we were always very lucky to have support, and financially we would always generally break even, especially as cheap as things were back in the 90s, God. But I would say it's really that kind of do it yourself because no one else will do it for you thing that has stuck with me my whole life and still kind of defines the way I approach things.
How did that carry over? So by the time, so 07, you had Destroy Their Future, 09, the Dear Friends and Gentle Hearts. Those are both on Fat Wreck, which is, obviously it's not a major, but that is as big as you could possibly get while still being an independent punk rock label. And you were doing some pretty good size like package tours at that point more regularly.
Yeah. So again, the timeline.
What bands were you touring with at that time?
Yeah. So that'll be a little, I think I can piece this together year wise. Not that it necessarily matters to listeners or to even to me, but 7 was Destroy Their Future. And that tour on that record was us and Lawrence Arms in a bus going around the country. And that was absolutely fantastic. That was a blast. We had, so yeah, 07. So that would have been the first time we did a bus tour. We never could have our own bus. We never would draw that much. But with that tour where we kind of put, got this package, like we're coming to your town. This is us, book us, pay us enough, whatever, to support this thing and get us to the next city. And every bunk was full. So it was 3 bands on the tour, us, Lawrence Arms and Sundowner. And with enough shared members, it was exactly 12 people with us, bands and crew. So like every bunk was taken. The bus was at capacity and it was like, we made it work and it was incredible. And again,
it was literally the guys from the Lawrence Arms at that point.
Yeah. Chris's band and the Falcon. It was a four band package tour. Yeah. So it's the Falcon as well. And Eli, from Smoking Popes was playing with the Falcon. It was a fantastic tour, fantastic time. Got to live kind of our rock star fantasies of being on a bus. And really, I loved the bus because you could just stay up late, watch TV, whatever, have some drinks, and then pass out. And then the next day you wake up in the town you're in. You wake up in the next city. So you can have a whole day there. You can do nothing and be a shithead. You can just go to Starbucks and use their bathroom because the bus doesn't have a bathroom. You can do whatever you want, but you don't have to wake up and drive every day, which for so many years, for over a decade, had been our experience. Where it's like, it's just, you're just in the van and it's like the same amount of time on the road, but you're asleep through most of it. It's incredible. So that to me is the real bus thing. It's not about being on the bus or the rock starness of it. It's like that someone else is driving for you. And then it made sense on this package tour. It was maybe a little lavish. We could have made it work with bands, but at some point it kind of makes more sense to all be on one vehicle. And so that was amazing in the same way that Lookout Freakout tour was, almost 10 years before, where it was like, you kind of were the thing that night. Obviously, when you get to big cities like New York or whatever, you aren't the one thing, but still it was like people in that scene who liked our band, who liked Lawrence Arms, is like, hey, we're coming on this date. Come see us. And some smaller cities, smaller towns, we would be the show that everyone would come out to. So it was good crowds. It was a lot of fun. 8, we did, I think, Alkaline Trio. We did Gaslight Anthem, who weren't that big at that point. We were kind of co-headlining, playing some actually smaller places. And we did the Do Nots in Germany. That was another incredible tour that was also on a bus. Again, nothing we could have done on our own, especially in Germany, but came over as their guests and shared the bus with them. And of course, it was their tour they'd booked. So the Do Nots here are like, they're now like massive in Germany. Still great friends with those dudes. And yeah.
Aren't German. I'll say I was on tour with Red City Radio and we were in Germany and we were shooting the shit with this, some random buddy of theirs. It turned out it was the guy from the Do Nots. I'm like, oh, cool band. And then later I see them headline over The Offspring. That's how big that fucking band is there. I'm like, oh, a band I've never heard of is headlining over The Offspring.
Totally. Last time they came through town, they played with a little East Bay band called Green Day at the Waldbühne in Berlin, which is like where Lollapalooza is and stuff. So yeah, they've done incredibly for themselves. They're the greatest, sweetest guys, and we had a blast on that tour. But again, kind of lucked our way into a bus tour that we never could have done on our own. And again, not just a bus tour, but a tour that was, the whole thing was booked. right? It was like we were the show. And in some of those towns, they were doing secondaries, you'd call it in the biz. You'd say, not Berlin, but Potsdam. Not, God, where did we not play on that tour? We did not play, I guess we played Cologne, we played Nuremberg, but we didn't play that many big cities, and we played a lot of really small cities. In fact, we'd tell some kids and some, and it was like my geography of Germany was crap back then, but it was on a bus, so you just wake up there and be like, oh, cool, they joked that I would always say, where's the river? You just want to sort of walk around, because at that point, like in the US, it's like, where's the Starbucks so we can use the bathroom and maybe get some coffee. But in Europe, it's just like you can be a tourist, it's like, where's the river? Where's the church? Where's the old town, but yeah, so that was incredible. And then I guess it was 9, we went back to Europe again, that time with All American Rejects, which wasn't so good, mostly just because they had to cancel like 4 or 5 shows on that tour.
Did that happen?
Yeah, it happened because 2 of the dudes in that band saw us on like one of our first tours in Oklahoma City at some, record store where there were like 30 people there. And we're like, holy shit, this band's awesome. So like, but 10, 15 years before. And I think they were the newer guys in the band, but yeah, it was all right. Again, saw more of the country, but that one was not on a bus. And driving around Europe, it's almost more brutal than driving around the US, because the US is built for cars. It's built around cars. So even if you have a long drive, you're on this like safe, flat, giant interstate. Europe, you're just in traffic circles forever. And then you're in some weird construction, and then you're in like 3 different rush hours, and then there's nowhere to park. So you have to load across like 3 lanes of traffic. And yeah. So that was, by the end of that era, it wasn't quite as fun, touring. And then we just kind of went on sort of a tour hiatus. It was never anything we discussed. We just kind of stopped taking tours and shows and so on. And we didn't put out any full lengths after that.
So the last probably, so you moved to Germany like 10 years ago, and really in that time, you guys just kind of do some weekenders periodically sort of thing now. Yeah.
So I moved in 2014. Already at that point, like I said, we'd maybe play once a year. So, we never broke up. We did kind of unofficially or officially break up in 2002, at which point we just remained friends. 3 of us played in Communiqué, so like we took a hiatus for a while. But in after 2009, 2010, we would play here and there. But again, it was always just one-off shows. And honestly, it kind of stayed the same even after I moved here. Scott moved away, he moved to Florida, and like Ryan's up in Portland, and like it's not always me that's the furthest away anymore. So we're in 4 different cities. We play kind of when we want to, when we get an offer, when it's something that can make sense, when it's a big enough show that we can, get plane tickets out of it and stuff. And we've talked about maybe doing stuff, piecing said shows together into a string to make more sense in the future. But it's not like we ever said, okay, now we're playing, now we're not playing. It just sort of has organically happened. But like I said, it wasn't really me moving away. It sort of corresponds to that, but already in maybe 2012, 13, we weren't playing that much, remained friends, but like just wasn't something any of us were doing, as we all kind of focused on that phase of our lives.
You mentioned that you worked like a decade plus in the games industry. I was just kind of curious about that. If you want to talk about that a little bit while we got a few minutes.
So moving to Berlin, I was telling Dallas before we started that like, my wife and I had a letterpress print studio in Oakland, Volta Press. And, we wanted to move to Berlin, so we just wanted to do it. And our whole kind of narrative for ourselves was we are printers. Like, that's what we do. We'll work in that industry. We'll work other jobs. We'll piece together freelance work, but we want to be printing when we get there. And we were, and we sort of made connections as soon as we kind of hit the ground here. But also in this sort of job searching here, immediately within 2.5 weeks, found myself working full time at Area Games. So at a big kind of games publisher based in Berlin. As part of my work being, localization department, editing, writing, etc., being a native English language speaker and native American English speaker. So it was this really fortuitous thing where that's what they were looking for. big company. It was 170 people when I joined, and it ballooned to 450 before it collapsed in 2016 to 18, at which time I was already gone. But basically, you know, I've had a weird relationship to games my whole life. When I was a kid, my stepmother worked for Atari. So I played builds of games that weren't even done in retrospect. Like, I remember having a copy of Pharaoh's Curse for the Atari 800, not even the 2600, that had like jokes from Strange Brew programmed into it. It was like, enter password or take off, you hoser. And I was like, what? I don't get it. When I was, 7 years old, playing these things on floppy disk. She's probably past the NDA where she would get in trouble for having brought home these release games that are probably now worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars if I'd still had them. But, played games from a very early age, was part of the whole first NES. That was a big part of my kind of junior high, early high school. We brought a Nintendo 64 on tour, had it in the van, had its TV strapped, like an old CRT TV strapped to the mini loft above us. So we'd play...
Four-player GoldenEye with Brendan Kelly?
Yeah. And we'd play... The funniest is when you play Mario Kart in a moving van, because you kind of lean with your car and then you're actually turning. Yeah, so like I said, we weren't always the most sensible or safest or touring. But yeah, and then really, like, weirdly in my 20s, I kind of stopped. So like in college, I never played games. Early 30s, stopped. And then somehow kind of in my 30s, it's like I got interested again, and sort of the games as a genre or as a whole thing kind of became something that I was interested in again, because they became something that could truly be these like stories and these kind of works of art.
Cinematic.
And that doesn't mean that I'm always, just like with movies and with books, I'm not always like, I'm not a snob. I'll play some shooters for the adrenaline and whatever. Like I play whatever, but at the same time, it can be art. I mean, it can be incredible. And so in, applying for this job, I was very honest, and I said, like, yeah, I'm native English speaker. I meet all these requirements. I'd be a great editor for your team, but also, like, I kind of love games in general, and have been tangentially introduced to the industry through, Atari and all that, and got that gig and was there for a couple of years. And every kind of company I've been at since then around Berlin and now internationally has been a games company. I haven't decided I'm going to only work in this industry. It's just, it really has kind of been something I can work within, and that you start having, I guess I would be considered a veteran at this point, 10 years. You start having not just perspective, but you start having real insights into the particular type of games you're specialized in, which in my case is MMOs. So, MMORPGs at first. And a lot of that is related to like international audiences. So Area's whole thing was bringing over games from Asia and localizing for a Western audience. And a lot of the games I worked at since then, did 6 years on Albion Online. That one is Western. It's from Berlin. It's made in Berlin by the team I worked with, but it's localized into 15 languages. So really, like, always having a global perspective, which I'll just mention that, but also living in a foreign country, living in a country where English is not the first language, has really changed the way I speak and the way I write. In that it's made me sort of more aware of idiom, and especially of Americanisms that are, it's still in the way I talk, and it's a form of kind of weird, I wouldn't say code switching, but it's a weird thing where, when we're chatting, I'll throw out, idioms and analogies. But when I'm speaking to coworkers, many of whom are not native English speakers, out of sort of, even if their English is great, kind of out of respect, I try to speak more clearly, more straightforward, and not throw in weird American idioms that even people from different sides of the states wouldn't understand, right? Like local stuff, hella, whatever.
Hella consider it, yes.
Whatever the versions we would each have are pop, I don't know what you guys call it there. But yeah.
Say pop, yes.
But yeah, I'm not going to, and I've worked with other people from the States originally who don't do that. And sometimes you can see people's eyes sort of glass over, because some people can hang, but if you miss that sort of what someone's saying and they're really heavy into idiom, they'll do that. So I think it's made me better. And it's been absolutely humbling on the language subject to learn German as an adult. it's not the easiest language. It's not the hardest language. It's notorious for the long words, but the long words are just compounds. That's nothing. That means you have more time to figure out what the hell it is. What's hard is just the rigorousness of the three genders, the declinations, that it's more of a Latinate construction. So, speaking like Shakespeare, like Yoda, whatever, dying ass I would kick, whatever. But like, it's basically, it's been very humbling, and it's really given me perspective to not take it for granted that I'm an English speaker. It's yet another kind of privilege that I and that many of us have globally, where it's like, I've been able to work all these jobs here in English, sometimes having meetings in German, but really that's more when it's like, okay, everyone in the room is like native German speakers except me. We'll just switch for this meeting, whatever. But the whole job and the whole privilege of being kind of a native speaker has helped me sort of get and stay in these positions where I can kind of be the expert on the team in that as well. But yeah, I don't know if, what the future holds, but I like games. I like working in the industry. It's a very unstable industry. But, the companies I've worked at have been good about, well, not Area by the end when they got bought, but have generally been good about being kind of sustainable and having the health of their company in mind, because it's very easy to overdo and say, oh, we're going to put out 1 million games and we're going to sell ourselves to blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of bleed your player base dry and go out of business a year later.
How is it going from the punk rock world where you were the nerdiest motherfucker in the room to now working in gaming where you are now the coolest guy in the room?
Motherfucker. Yeah.
I don't know that I'm the coolest guy in the room. Yeah,
Top quintile, I'm sure. You've seen tits before and you have a guitar and you know Blake Schwarzenbach. Like, that's pretty cool.
It's a lot of assumptions, but yes, no. I think, I don't know. I generally am fairly private, I'm friends with some of my coworkers, but I don't generally go around saying, hey, this is my band, check it out, blah, blah. Or, no, I don't know. I'm not on the programming side. I'm not on kind of even the level design side. It's all sort of different species. I'm not on the game design side, though I've worked a lot with game designers and have a lot of insight into it, particularly around patch notes and updates and stuff like that. No, I don't know. It's fun. Occasionally someone will sort of, one of my coworkers was wearing a Do Not shirt the first day, and it's like, hey, I know those guys.
On speed dial.
Like, oh yeah, I know them too. I was like, no, I know them. Like, here, I'll text him a photo of you wearing the shirt, and then he wrote back like, oh, funny. The guy was like, holy shit. Generally, I think of myself as re-nerding. Can you be a born again nerd, right? Like born again Christian?
I've done that. COVID kicked in and I hadn't played a video game and I'm going to say fucking 10, 15 years. I started playing Age of Empires 2 again and Heroes of Might and Magic 3.
Awesome. Yeah. So basically I did that very much kind of in my adult life. I'm chased again in the nerdy literature sense too. And really for COVID, for me, it was writing. So that's when I really started becoming serious as a writer, publishing stuff more, and really kind of having that discipline, not just about writing. I'm not one of those people that believes you have to write every day. I don't write every day, but more about having the discipline of holding yourself to a broader schedule and having a discipline to keep submitting stuff when it gets rejected, because inevitably it will.
A little bit of a side tangent, but when COVID lockdowns happened, Alex and I were living in Honolulu, and eventually it was like, I need a fucking break from hiking and the mountains and just the sheer beauty. Like, I need to sit in a dark fucking corner of my tiny apartment and just like play some goddamn games. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your service.
Doing the Lord's work. Yeah, pixels are beautiful too. Yeah, they say the whole go outside thing. I don't make myself go outside each day either. Like I generally try to be healthy and such. But yeah, I don't feel like there's kind of the one adult. I don't feel like you have to abandon stuff like that in being younger and then sort of transition to being an adult. I think stuff comes and goes. So stuff has come and gone throughout my life, including music, where now it's kind of coming back more. We're playing more. Did a 7-inch 3 years ago, I think, on Fat, which we recorded with me remotely, which is much more doable now at a really high quality. And so music, literature, games, all these things have kind of come and gone into and out of my life. But at this point, it's all about the writing and the music and the games all at the same time, apparently, which is good.
Okay, I had a real quick curious question because this has been on my mind since you sent your bio. Actually, before that, the name of the band American Steel, is there any connection to the big like warehouse turned art space in Oakland?
Yes. That
Okay.
you got it on the first guess. It's absolutely that sign. So it was nothing back then. It was an empty warehouse, right? So it's the American Steel warehouse for the American Steel Company's warehouse in West Oakland that was there and then shut down as part of the whole West Oakland shipyard depression after World War II, et cetera. But we practiced at Burnt Ramen on, I forget the street, but it was just a side street of that. So that was on what's called Mandela Parkway now. There used to be a freeway there, but in the 89 quake, that was the part that collapsed really horribly and was, people died and stuff. And then they cleared that whole freeway out. And so that street was big and wide. So it's this big, wide open street. It's actually been, despite the sort of tragic reason for it, it's been really kind of good for the neighborhood to kind of bring sunlight and openness back into it. It's never great when a freeway runs right through a neighborhood. But we practiced very close to there. So we'd bang away at whatever instrument we were sitting at. I played drums or whatever, go outside, open our, 32s of High Life, look out over at the building, laugh at the sign, say, American Steel, huh? And then go back in, bang away at some more songs, go back outside, sit there, drink our beers, look over at the American Steel sign. And then one day it was like, oh shit, we have this show at, such and such Cyclone Warehouse, or I don't remember, one of our very first shows that was actually at a venue that had a name that wasn't just Jack's house or whatever. And it was like, okay, we have to name our band. I don't know. How about American Steel? I'm like, okay, yeah. And I won't say we've regretted it ever since, but it's a weird name for a band. And it's really weird when you get overseas. And it's probably gotten us through a lot of traffic stops a lot faster. It's like, oh, right on, American Steel, cool. Yeah. You boys have a good night. Okay.
Hell yeah, brother.
Okay. Like, I don't know. Band names come and go, and there's far worse, as far as quintiles. I don't know. It's maybe second 40% quintile, whatever, bad band names, but it's stuck with us ever since.
I tour with Mustard Plug, so by comparison, you're doing fine.
Okay, and so when you guys were playing by there, it was just a sort of abandoned warehouse. It hadn't been.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what year it became kind of a space. I mean, it's great that it's used. It's not my scene. It's more the, I guess, burning kind of burner art, whatever scene, which is great, whatever. But it was absolutely just a giant abandoned warehouse at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we did this festival. It's called Sand by the Ton that they did at the American Steel warehouse, and it was supposed to be ice by the ton, and they were going to have all these ice sculptures and everything. And they're like, what the fuck are we going to do? It's Oakland in the summer. So then they're like, okay, sand.
In a steel building.
Yeah, they basically just kind of made this like beach sort of area, and there's like sand sculptures and all kinds of things. But yeah, very much like burner crew kind of people.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So these are our final 3 questions. We've been asking these to everybody. I guess if you listen to the previous episodes, you probably know. So the first one I want to ask is, what's the last thing you listened to?
Last thing I listened to would have been, we didn't talk about this at all, but I've gotten really into metal in my adulthood, doom metal particularly, but like all kinds. But yeah, for whatever reason, again, pandemic related and writing, it's just what I listen to, and it's become kind of what I listen to primarily these days. So a few weeks ago, I went and saw Baroness and Paul Bear in Berlin, and got the first Paul Bear record on vinyl, which I've wanted for years. It's just super expensive in Europe, and has to ship from the US, so it hits customs and blah, blah, blah. So I went straight to their merch table after they played and bought their first record, which is double LP, Sorrow and Extinction. Has probably my favorite song of theirs, is the very first song in their very first record called Foreigner. But listening to that on vinyl over the last week, a ton. And yeah, just my absolute favorite from them. Only ever having heard it on, online. It's pretty incredible to hear on
Least
vinyl.
scary looking guy at the show.
Yeah, I still hold my own, and I don't know, it's Berlin. So, we went to a few years ago at the same venue, Huxley's. Went to Neurosis, and my wife had come straight from teaching, so rolled up just like in a sundress or something of summer. So it's right. a blue sundress to Neurosis. And yeah, the clouds of weed smoke and scuzzy dudes were all kind of like, what the hell? But yeah, I never, again, that's part of Gilman. I don't really give a shit how I dress at shows. So, but yeah, that was a super fun night. And God, I'll say, like, you know, we always made fun of the whole metal thing, like, oh, rock stars, why you need so many amps, you know, like 7 guys on stage tuning your shit, whatever. But God, those shows sound good live. Like, you know, especially bands that really can play and are really incredible. Like the stuff I like that's maybe a little bit prog adjacent or Southern stuff, like Elder or Baroness or whatever. It's like, they just sound incredible live. And I've seen Baroness in Berlin before, but I'd never seen Paul Bearer, and that was a real one I was glad to tick off. I love that.
Awesome. So I guess moving into the next question, what is a band that you feel is criminally underrated and really should be more people should know about this band?
Yeah. I mean, another sort of musical heart of my life, this whole sort of scenes or whatever, but just whole broad things that have influenced me is the Pacific Northwest. So like my dad lives in Portland and has for a few decades now. And like, of course, there's grunge and whatever, and it's all hitting when I was in high school. And yeah, you know, brought in the whole alternative thing, which was always there, but of course as a mainstream thing. But to me, the bands I think of that are super underrated are the ones that kind of didn't make it out of that were never like grunge enough or whatever, or just broke up before they could be. But like, to me, in addition to bands that I like Unwound, I wouldn't say is, you know, underrated. They're rated. They're great. It's kind of an underground band or whatever, but like that sort of darkness, but it's still indie, but it's still musical. It's a little like kind of a West Coast DC sound, if that makes any sense or whatever. Of all those bands, there's a few that I only ever had on vinyl, like Cracker Bash and stuff. But the one I would say is totally underrated is 30-06 from Portland. Absolute killer record called Boso Zoku, named after, you know, the Japanese biker gang. Like, I think you can find them on Spotify, and I don't know anything about them. I feel like people know too much about bands now, right? Like, you can hear some guy talk for an hour about his band and his background and everything. And you can look everyone up on every, you know, every member of every band is known, and you can email them or you can message them on Instagram or whatever. And back then it was like, my dad lived up there and he went to the record store down on Burnside that I don't remember the name of. It was like, oh, my son's, you know, I'm visiting my son. Like, what are some local bands you'd recommend? And the guy said, oh, these two. And he gave him Heat Miser, which is, you know, Elliott Smith's first band, and this 30-06 record. And, yeah, I dug Heat Miser, but like they're kind of okay. They're a little bit straightforward. And it was before Elliott Smith became Elliott Smith and sort of hugely known. But God, yeah, that 30-06 record just kicked my ass, and it continues to. And I still don't really know anything about them. They broke up. I think one of the guys died or something. I don't know. And it's kind of beautiful to not know much about a band and to dig them so much, because it just can be this sort of pure listening experience. So yeah, I would say, you know, there's other bands from up there that I don't like enough. Like White Orange is another one, super underground, kind of grunge adjacent. A little more doomy, but again, underrated. I would have to say 30-06.
Heard of them, Alex? You're in Portland for a long time.
I think so. No, I don't remember them.
They might have come
Is that
and
the
gone.
album?
No, it's the one even before that, I think. Bosa Zoku.
I'm looking
Yeah, so
up.
again, yeah, it's probably a good sign if you haven't heard of an underrated band, because it means they're underrated, right? Yeah. So it's like, totally underrated band. Yeah, the Ramones, super underrated. Yeah.
All right. So final question, Desert Island album or albums, you know, you get a handful of albums. This is all you get. You're stuck there. What do you listen to?
Ooh, yeah.
What do you take?
So, I mean, talking about that whole sort of COVID shifts, that kind of DIY, becoming internal discipline, getting truly into writing as a practice. And this is also where I really got into kind of droney, doomy, dark stuff. A band called Yob has tons of records I love. They're one of my favorite bands, but their album Clearing a Path to Ascend is like the one that became almost like a mantra, or it's a little bit, that's not quite the right phrase. It's whatever you would say to sort of kick off something, to start something. So I would put this on and I would say, okay, I'm going to write now. Like, I don't feel like it tonight. I'm distracted, whatever, but I'm going to put this record on and let it kind of wash over me, and I'm going to write. And it's funny because, like, it's not my favorite record ever. There's other records I maybe like more. It's maybe not even my favorite Yob record. I don't know. Like, they have some, like, Illusion of Motion has my absolute favorite song of theirs on it. But, like, that record to me it's 4 songs, because doom metal, right? Sometimes you only get one if you listen to Bell Witch, speaking of Portland. 1 90-minute song per record. But it's 4 songs, and it's like they flow so well together, and the whole thing is just this, like, to me, it is like the feeling of, like, I feel better after I listen to it in a very kind of deep, in my soul kind of way. So maybe weird answer, but I think that would be the one. Of course, the only correct answer for a Desert Island disc is anything on CD, so you can signal planes when they fly over, right? But with the
New
mirror
twist to the answer. I like it.
No, I think I would have to if I. And yeah, I'm sure the way I am fickle with musical tastes, in 5 years, I'd be like, God damn it, why'd I choose this depressing doom metal record? I want some op-ivy,
Sublime, dude. The beach.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, John. I think that's it, unless you got anything else.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Punk Rock Academic. We hope you're as inspired as we are by the incredible stories from the punk rockers revolutionizing higher education. If you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow rebels. Stay tuned for more tales of academic anarchy and keep the DIY spirit alive. Until next time, keep rocking and never stop learning.